What's up YouTube, this is Detroit Borg with a look at the speed and performance of the newest 11-inch MacBook Air introduced in July 2011. So we get the 1.6 GHz Sandy Bridge Core i5 dual-core processor, and I have the mid-grade model, so that upgrades me from 2 gigs to 4 gigs of RAM and from 64 gigs to 128 gigs on the SSD. And I do have the standard graphics processor here, which is the integrated Intel Graphics HD 3000, which shares 384 megs with the main memory. So let's go ahead and do one of my favorite things with an SSD computer, and that's launch a bunch of apps just to show you the power of the SSD. So of course this is far more than a reasonable person would toss at their MacBook Air, but you get the idea. It's very stable under these loads, and it's certainly very quick if you just want to load a few apps or shut it down and restart it quickly. So exactly how fast is this SSD? Well, if we run a disk speed test, we can see that the write speed hovers a little under 250 megs per second, and the read speed hovers a little under 270 megs per second. Now, this is a substantial increase from a standard hard disk drive, the ones you might find in a standard MacBook Pro 13-inch. Those run at about 54 on the write speed and 84 on the read speed. Now, if we look at the speed and performance of the MacBook Air versus the SSDs in the MacBook Pro and the iMac, we'll find that the MacBook Air actually outperforms them. In this case, the MacBook Pro hovers around 200 megs per second on the read and write speed, and the iMac hovers around 180 on the write speed and around 215 on the read speed. So again, the MacBook Air has a more modern SSD and therefore outperforms them. Now, as some of you may be aware, the new MacBook Air is being sold with two different SSDs, one by Toshiba and one by Samsung. The one I tested here is the Samsung model, and the older SSDs, as you saw in my MacBook Pro and my iMac, are Toshiba. And unfortunately, that model is being sold into the MacBook Air as well. Unfortunately, you can't identify which version you're getting before you buy the MacBook Air. So what I'm going to do is post a video link in my description below so you can take a look at John at TLD Today's video on how to identify which SSD you got in your MacBook Air. Now, if we take a look at the Geekbench scores for the MacBook Air, it scored about 5468, which is a significant leap from last year, nearly doubling the scores from the 2010 model. Now, the MacBook Pro, the standard configuration running at 2.3 gigahertz, 4 gigs of RAM, but adding an SSD gives us about 7,000, which is a significant leap from the Air, but not as significant as you might expect. Now, if we go much higher up the Apple food chain to the top of the line iMac, which is 3.4 gigahertz, Core i7, 16 gigs of RAM, and the SSD, that gives us about 12,716 on the Geekbench score. Certainly a much more powerful computer. Next up, we're going to take a look at the gaming performance of the MacBook Air, and to do this, we're going to use the Cinebench benchmarking tool. And if we look at the scores for the MacBook Air, the OpenGL test gives us about 10.98 frames per second, and the CPU runs at about 1.91 points. If we look at the MacBook Pro, the one we mentioned earlier with the standard configuration plus the SSD, that runs a little bit better at 12.10 frames per second and 2.58 points on the CPU score. So you can see here that both of these computers have the same integrated graphics processor, which shares RAM with the main memory. So both of them are the Intel HD 3000 processor. Now, if we look at a computer with dedicated graphics or a discrete graphics processor like the iMac, we can see that scores are very different. So looking at the iMac, we get a whopping 43.5 frames per second with a CPU at 6.84 points. That's certainly a significant performance difference, and that's thanks largely to the large graphics processor inside the iMac, which gives us 2 gigs of dedicated RAM. So how does this translate to real-world performance? Well, it's kind of surprising. The MacBook Air on paper doesn't look like it can do anything. But if we play Call of Duty 4, it runs fairly smoothly. This is my only example here, but certainly higher-end games or more modern games are going to give you more trouble. We do occasionally see some frame dropping and some skips here and there, and it does choke on more intense scenes. But it does play just fine, and this was the case with the previous MacBook Air, which was even lower on the score level. So I would say if you want this computer for gaming, it's not your best choice, but you certainly can get away with it, and it's certainly a nice side benefit. Alrighty guys, that's it for this test of the MacBook Air. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.